is boring. It's the groove side bomber. Mic in my vest tight, strapped to my chest like I'ma run up in the party, holler and be like, oh, fulfilling my calling. Big Will, that's my name. Writing rhymes, that's my game. Ask me again and I'll tell you the same. Look, just write your number right next to your name, girl.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, fellas and fellettes, I am proud to be here today to showcase an actual, true, real, distributed denial build for Zane. Yes, that is right. You've heard me correct. I've finally done it. I have finally cracked the code. I have finally found an actual, genuine purpose for distributed denial. We are using a bit of an interesting interaction here. If you've been around my channel for a while now, you'll know that distributed denial has a kind of secret mechanic where you can merge shields together to have both of their effects active at once. The way that this is done is simply by equipping a shield, specifically a shield that actually works with distributed denial, throwing out your barrier, and then swapping to a shield. This allows distributed denial to have the effects of that shield while your other shield is also active. For example, you can have the Void Rift or the Impaler on your barrier, which will, when hit, fire out those spikes, and then you can equip a Revolter to yourself. And bada bing bada boom, you can have the Revolter effect on those shield spikes. When I initially learned about this, I kind of dismissed it as really cool but not super useful, as most of the shields that you could use that would make this actually really cool do not work with distributed denial and therefore really couldn't be any use to us at all. However, there was a shield type that I overlooked, and that was boosters. So let's get on into things here now that I've explained the mechanic that we're using, and start out here with our gear, specifically the Big Boom Blaster. This is our barrier shield, and as such, the anointment that you have on it really doesn't matter, as you're purely using this for the booster that it drops, which gives us a grenade and heavy ammo back, which is nice but not super necessary or even that useful for most launchers. But this booster is a 60% shield restore booster. This is the biggest shield restoration that you can get out of a booster, out of any shield, and as such, having this on barrier of course eating a bunch of shots, with each shot having a 60% chance to drop that 60% shield booster, we're going to be spamming these things out, and the shield that we equip after throwing out our barrier is, at least most of the time, the 0.M. So again, just to showcase this, the way that this works, you toss out your barrier while you have the Big Boom Blaster equipped. After it's out, you swap over to the 0.M, and then you have your barrier with the Big Boom Blaster on it, and you with the 0.M on. So as you can see here, I have an amp shot, but as well as that, if I take damage, I'm dropping boosters that will restore my shield, allowing me to have another amp shot. This effectively makes it a very similar playstyle to the amp Bloodletter Mose builds, where we're kind of just upkeeping amp to an insane degree, and to a degree that lets us pretty much have it on every single shot during heavy mobbing. Is this a little bit of an overkill interaction to be using because there's things in this game like shield reboot? Yeah, a little bit, but also it does still give us genuinely better uptime, and this is the best use case that I could really find for distributed denial. So while it is overkill, it's cool, fun, and I'm having a blast with this build. Since we aren't using an elemental ASE on our weapons, I do recommend using an elemental ASE on this. Generally for mobbing, I just run cryo as it's a nice element with good coverage. Then I'll be more specific on element matching with bosses. Before exiting the shield section though, I do want to mention that the Infernal Wish with double amp I think is probably better than the 0.M, even though the 0.M is more amp overall. But the Infernal Wish duplicating your projectiles, at least when it comes to single projectile weapons, is effectively similar to a 100% bonus damage amp, with the double amp roll giving you another 50% on top of that. The 0.M, on the other hand, while being the highest amp damage shield, is only 125% amp. It is also the unique legendary amp, and with that, it only applies to a single projectile, so when using multi-pellet projectile weapons, it is actually more ideal to use the Infernal Wish amp, or to use a purple one-shotter shield, since that will apply to every pellet of like the plumage, for example. For class mod, the best thing to run here is the antifreeze with as many points as you can get into violent momentum. This is just a shit ton of gun damage for us to run around with, and since we're using rocket launchers mostly, running and gunning is generally pretty easy to build up that big one shot. Although the antifreeze is what I find to be the best, the executor is still a very good option if you do not have a +5 antifreeze. Even with +5, the executor does actually outdamage the antifreeze by a decent margin. However, I find that the antifreeze is just significantly more consistent as it doesn't rely on actually hitting a crit. And while there's plenty of rocket launchers that you can use that can easily hit crits, there's also plenty of rocket launchers that you might want to use that cannot as easily hit crits. So I just find the antifreeze to be the most consistent, but carrying around an executor to be able to swap to can also be very nice, or just using the executor again if you don't have the antifreeze. Now the antifreeze, of course, isn't the only class mod that can roll +5 into violent momentum, but the only other one that I would recommend is a purple because the infiltrator actively harms this build, since the infiltrator keeps you at 0 shield, so definitely avoid that one as you will not be able to use your amp with it. For a grenade, it really doesn't matter what you put in this slot because the only way that we actually have to throw grenades is a single point in duct tape mod. My best recommendation is really an It's Piss or Mesmer because on the rare occasion that it does trigger in a situation you might want it to, you at least get a little bit of damage or extra utility. But really, you aren't going to be relying on your grenade for much of anything other than your anointment, which I tend to just run an ASC element on, usually radiation just to get some more rad explosions and AoE. So as long as both your grenade and shield anointments are different elements, you can really use whatever you want. And finally, for our relic, I'm pretty much always just running a toboggan. Again, this is a lot more amp for us to play around with, and more slide speed for building up violent momentum even harder. Carrying around a cut purse launch pad is also really nice, especially if you're using heavier ammo cost weaponry, allowing you to slam and pretty much refill your entire ammo pool. Because as I mentioned, while we do have a little bit of ammo sustain from the Big Boom Blaster, that's only really good for weapons that don't consume a lot of ammo per shot, like the kick charger. Otherwise, it's really not doing a hell of a lot for us. Now for our weapons, I'm pretty much running ASE Splash on everything, as this is just a huge damage boost for us. Though on some things it can also be worth running a 150/90 variant, but generally I only whip out that anointment for bossing. As for the actual weapons that we use, I mean, you can kind of just use any rocket launcher ever. My personal favorites to use generally is the kick charger, the yellow cake, the globetrotter, and the hive. Though a couple other standouts are the Major Kong, especially for bossing. The Nukem is incredibly fun for mobbing. Creamer as well, a really fun one for mobbing, can also boss, but not as well as some other things. The Rocket Pod, a very fun mobbing launcher. Mongol, again, very fun. And the Plumage also being quite fun, but really needing a one-shotter to get the most out of. Now moving on to our stoves, for the most part, our trees aren't looking too crazy. For Blue Tree, 5 out of 5 violent momentum and violent speed, of course, giving us that big damage scaling, though I also put 5 points into Cold Bore. For a build focusing very heavily on rocket launchers, even for mobbing like this, Cold Bore can actually be really nice and we can make really good use out of it. The reason I don't generally use Cold Bore or recommend it in most situations is because I see a lot of people just putting points into this specifically to use it during bossing. But when it comes to Zane, most of the time this is completely overkill and it's not enough damage to make or break a boss kill. Most of the time, if you were going to one-shot a boss, you would do it without Cold Bore, and if you wouldn't, Cold Bore would not help you to do it. In mobbing though, this can help you ramp up your damage a lot faster, as well as just giving a little bit more elemental coverage if necessary. It just helps out a hell of a lot to make our mobbing potential a lot more consistent if you're just swapping back and forth between your weapons, which can take a little bit of time to get used to, just swapping back and forth, but it's not too difficult once you get the hang of it and work it into your playstyle. That being said, if you don't like Cold Bore and swapping your weapons constantly, you also just don't need to use it, and these points can go somewhere else. But moving down, of course, 1 point salvation for the lifesteal. As always, you never need more than 1 point in here at the end game of BL3, especially with rocket launchers. A single shot is going to be bringing us all the way back to full. 1 point C in red, letting us activate our kill stills on action still activation, as well as buffing them up by 15%, and then 3 points into Cool Hand. Really nice for rocket launchers. This is where you would want to put those points from Cold Bore if you had them to spare, because reload speed on rocket launchers is very helpful. But we only do 3 points so that we can move on down. 3 points into Playing Dirty. I never recommend more than 3 or 4 points into this still, as it's just unnecessary because of how this works. Because the still card, how it explains how the still works, is just straight up incorrect, where that extra shot chance is actually just the chance of activating this kill still, and while it's active, your next 5 shots are guaranteed to have a a bonus projectile. So at just 3 points, especially since we're using Mantis Cannon, we pretty much always have this active. 2 points into Good Misfortune, helping us upkeep our barrier, and then of course 1 point into Death Follows Close. Moving on to our purple tree, again quite generic. Starting out, I put 5 points into Deja Vu. As I mentioned, reload speed is incredibly nice with rocket launchers, but even better than reload speed is just making yourself reload less, which Deja Vu is incredibly good at doing as long as you're hitting crits. If you are using rocket launchers that have difficulty hitting crits, then you could instead just go to Mana Focus, giving yourself a hell of a lot of accuracy and handling. We then dump into Headsman's Hand and Commitment. Headsman's Hand giving us crit damage, Commitment pretty much just for the cooldown rate, 1 point Fugitive to let us run and gun, 5 points Domino Effect, a little bit of fire rate, a little bit of reload speed, 3 points into Erasure because it's Erasure and we're using rocket launchers. You hit a crit on an enemy and anything behind it is just going to be absolutely obliterated. 1 point to Sheer Will, giving us a little bit of cooldown rate, but mostly just to help us actually move down the tree so that we can grab our man Flint, giving us 25% bonus damage while ADSing. Of course, this is a V2 damage bonus, and therefore, even though it only says 25%, this is an incredibly strong skill for us to pick up and utilize, being multiplicative with many of our other damage sources. So of course, we are using Mantis Cannon here, letting us spam our action skills and keep barrier up better, as well as constantly proccing our ASEs, and I use this with No Way Out, letting us debuff enemies, again being a very strong multiplicative damage bonus, and Proliferation giving us a little bit more cannon damage, but mostly taken so that we have the +2 additional charges, letting us spam it even harder. Now coming to Green Tree, I go for Adrenaline, giving us some more cooldown rate while our shields are full, which is honestly probably the best use of 5 points that happens in this skill tree, because we need 5 more to dump somewhere to get Distributed Denial. I opt for Ready for Action as I feel this just increases overall consistency a little bit. We are still relying on boosters mostly for our shield regen, but if you're in a situation where boosters just aren't dropping, or maybe you forgot to use your little shield merge tech, then Ready for Action can let you still make use of your amp pretty damn consistently. Otherwise, your other options are Rise to the Occasion or Brain Freeze. Brain Freeze doesn't really do much, since if you're hitting a crit, you're likely going to one-shot the enemy anyways, and Rise to the Occasion not doing much because we're pretty much always going to be max shields. But of course, star of the show, we grab Distributed Denial, letting Barrier inherit the abilities of our shields. If you do want a full breakdown on what does and doesn't work with Distributed Denial, and my previous testing with shield merging, both those videos will be linked in the description below or popping up in the top right corner of the screen now. Of course, this is what's letting us use our Big Boom Blaster boosters to upkeep our amp shield. And of course, with this, we are using Barrier, which I tend to just run Charged Relay for a little bit of movement speed while it's on the ground, and All-Rounder to give us full coverage. And finally, we have our Orange Tree, 3 points into Praemunitus to get more mag size, 2 points into Borrowed Time to help us move down the tree and also upkeep Barrier a little bit better. This is actually incredibly good even at 2 points with Mantis, because Mantis lets us stack this up to 6 times after we use all of our Mantis charges and have Barrier active. Then 1 point into Duct Tape Mod just to give us some self-damage immunity and allow us to occasionally throw out grenades, and I like to put 1 point into Donnybrook because that health regen has saved my ass on multiple occasions. But yeah, that is going to do it for Big Boom Boyo, or Booster Boyo. I don't think I've fully decided on what I'm calling this yet. I don't know, whatever's in the thumbnail or title. As I said, I'm very excited to actually have found a use for Distributed Denial, even if it's not an amazing use, it is a pretty fun use, and I'm glad that I can actually have a build where I spec Distributed Denial and it does something. Again, if you're more interested in this skill, I have 2 videos talking about it already, and there's probably going to be another one in the future because, man, I love yapping about this thing. But of course, that's gonna about do it for this one. I hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, definitely consider leaving a like, comment, subscribe, all of that. I'll be live right after this video goes up right here on YouTube and also over on my Twitch channel, where there'll be a link to down in the description below, and just below that is a link to my Discord server where you can come and join and hang out. As well as in that Discord server is where you can find the save file for this build. But with that all being said, I hope to see you guys in the next one.